Hi again, I'm Alister Benn and this is Expressive Photography. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for tuning in once again. Now, this week I want to talk about how we decide on images to process. It's one of these crazy things that I get an awful lot of emails about is, how to choose images, which one should you be processing. So that's what we're going to cover in this week's video. Before we get into this week's video, however, I just want to make one quick announcement, which is this week I finally released my first ever video processing series, which is creative black and white processing in Adobe Lightroom. Now, these videos, it's 3 hours and 45 minutes, 25 separate videos going through the entire Lightroom tool catalog, plus 4 or 5 fully worked examples from start to finish. And it's really designed as a complementary body of work to go along with the Luminosity and Contrast ebook. And between the two, they produce a complete creativity course to look at the world, how to see the world, how to compose, and of course, how to process in black and white. So please click on that link below. Check it out. It's only £35 for nearly 4 hours of video, so I think it offers really great value, and of course you're helping us to continue doing this with your support, so thank you very much for that. So in terms of how we select images to work, the first thing we can look at is how I organize my Lightroom catalog. So if we jump into Lightroom here, we can see down the left hand side I have these broad definitions, so Africa, Asia, birds, Canada and the USA, Europe and New Zealand, and then at the bottom there's the UK. And if I click on one of those, the Asia is subdivided into China, Indonesia and Nepal, and then China is obviously subdivided by years and locations depending on how I was organizing at the time. So I have this kind of structure within my Lightroom catalog. Now, I only have just short of 25,000 images in my catalog, which for someone who's been shooting pretty much continuously for the last 20 years is actually quite a small number. I did a lot of culling earlier on, and I don't shoot huge amounts these days, so the numbers are kind of reasonable. It's a little under 700 rolls of Velvia. But the big question is, how do we choose which images to work? And I think the best way to look at that is kind of anecdotally. So let's jump into one folder kind of at random. So I'm going to come into Canada and I'm going to look at the trip I did to Canada in 2014 and into Mount Assiniboine. So I've got a bunch of images here. There's 272 photographs in my catalogue for that trip to Mount Assiniboine. And I remember very clearly, it was back in October 2014, I'd been there for a week, and then I came straight back to Europe and I ran a series of workshops for maybe 5 or 6 weeks after that. And then the winter kicked in and I had other things to do, more workshops. And I think it was about 6 months later that I finally got to look at those images. And it was the first time that I'd really had a big period of time between shooting and processing. Now, what that time does for you is, first of all, creates distance between you and the taking of the images. And what I found was I couldn't get my mind back into this mental state of who was I, what did I feel, what was the moment like. And that immediacy of understanding where I wanted to take a photograph was a little bit alien. Because I'm sure, like many of you, there's a tendency to get back after a trip, whether it's on a weekend or a workshop or a holiday or something like that. You come back and you want to dive into those folders and get into those images. The problem with that is I think that we have a very, we're too personally involved in it. We lose that objectivity to a certain extent. And what I found was that when I started looking through these folders, Some images resonated with me on a purely aesthetic level, and it was who I am sat in front of the computer at this moment was deciding which images I was more likely to want to process. And I can do the same thing today, as I can just skim through, and I think realistically it's the ones that speak to you, it's the ones that are asking questions of you. They tend to be the ones that you're going to get drawn to. And I think if we do that, we are freeing ourselves from this judgment of, oh, that's my favorite, or, that's an image I really want to get into. And if we look at this a little bit deeper, what we're going to find is that if I just look at this randomly, I mean, this is just one photograph just taken totally at random. I know why I took this. I can understand why I took it, because it's all luminosity and contrast. Now, this was taken before I started the whole journey into the luminosity and contrast book and, the epiphanies in the Gobi Desert. This is 6 years ago, but I know why I took this. Now, because it's a raw file, it's well exposed, and if we slip into the develop module here, we can see that there's no clipped shadows and no clipped highlights. It's just a well exposed photograph. Now, I still know why I took it, and if we allow ourselves to understand that it is luminosity and contrast that tends to drive many of our decisions, if we drop that exposure, we can suddenly see that this area on the left-hand side becomes really much more evident again, and we can see where these highlights lie. Now, there's a kind of a nice sweeping curve of light there. That is a distraction. This is a distraction. So how can we simplify this? Well, we can crop out some of the content, and we shouldn't be afraid of cropping. This is a 16 by 9, and all of a sudden we've got way more simplicity in our frame. We've kept this sweep of light that's coming down from this lit cliff, and we've got this connection up on the top right hand side. If we start applying some of the things that we've learned in the previous videos that I've been doing, we need to understand luminosity, contrast. They are the bottom line too. We have geometry, we have atmosphere, and we have color. We also have three-dimensionality and depth, and therefore we have a tonal shift. You can see there's blueness up in the right hand side of the shadows curve. What that's saying is that there are shadows in this photograph that are bluish. Now we can emphasize that blueness and create a contrast between the warm tones and the cool tones. So I need to create more contrast in this photograph because I need to see more of those transitions. So I'm just going to emphasize that shift a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be a great photograph, but I can understand why I'm making it. So if I just add some light to that foreground through there, and a little bit of clarity, and then another gradient to come in from the back, and I'm going to cool that a little bit further and add some whites in there. Now, that was just a little exploration of it's kind of exploring why I took the photograph. I can see why I took it. Should I decide to go in and maybe do a bit more processing with that image, then maybe I could turn it into something. But that little couple of minutes that I've just spent with that was practice. Yeah. So practicing with our images and understanding three-dimensionality, understanding depth, understanding transitions, understanding where the light is, understanding how to emphasize these things. So in our first question there, why do we process images? What are we trying to achieve? practice can be a really, really good reason. Now, if we come back into the catalogue and I continue my skimming through this catalogue, then obviously we start coming into the incredible sunrise. Now, this is one of the images I worked in the videos, so if you want to watch me do that, then you'll have to get stuck into those. But realistically, every single photograph that I find here is a little moment in time, and I think the easiest way to look at these things is to basically say, why did I take it? And if we understand why we took it in the first place, we have to understand that there is light, yeah? There is a transition, there's contrast, there's all sorts of different things in this frame that are going to demand our attention. And the bottom line, unfortunately, is that no one can tell you which images to process. But what we can do is explain to you the likely triggers of why you may wish to process an image. Now, I kind of like this sparse grasses down in the bottom here, juxtaposed with the mountain. There's some misty reeds in the background, and this might be a nice little candidate to slip into black and white. And by doing so, I can create a lot more contrast, because black and white is a lot more forgiving in terms of contrast than color. So I need to do a little bit more in the way of opening up some of this stuff. Oops, something funky went on there. Select that pin again. Open up that foreground somewhat. So very quickly we can get to a point where we can produce a black and white image that is going to be a lot more dynamic in its manifestation. Now, I'm doing this incredibly quickly. Whoops, I'll dial this back in a moment. You can kind of slap it on thick to start off with, and then dial it back somewhat. We weren't a million miles away from where we wanted to be. And I think I will finish this off with a vignette. So I know that I'm not talking very much in this particular video, but these are just quick demonstrations of some of the reasons why I might choose something. And I think what I did there is I just saw something. I saw a connection in light between the foreground, little frozen stems, and the mountain in the background. Now, if we analyze this photograph, there's geometry and angularity in those foreground grasses, and there's clearly the pyramid of rock and ice in the background. It's the light, it's the hierarchy of light between the front and the back. The light will guide you always in a photograph. And in something like this, it's so easy to see where the luminosity is, because the luminosity is where the joy in the photograph is. So if you quickly go into your Lightroom catalog, you drop that exposure, it will tell you where the light is. And once you see where the luminosity is, you can see, right, where's the relationship between these areas? Are there relationships between these areas? And it's the quickest way to determine if you've made a good composition or a bad composition, is understanding, is this a good, logical, can it be harmonious, or is it going to be dissonant? If it's going to be dissonant, you may want to do that, but it might not be very popular. So hopefully this type of content is useful to you, because it's very much driving the why are we doing things. All the tools that I'm demonstrating here, I've demonstrated in my books and videos and things like that, and in other YouTube videos that I produced on here for free. But the bottom line is that the tools just allow us to articulate feelings, emotions, aesthetics, and our relationship with the images and the time that we spend out in the field. Another good way to go into folders is to already have an idea of what you might want to do. Now, as a professional landscape photographer, there's an awful lot of utility associated with the photographs I make. You know, sometimes I need images that are to illustrate an article, or to go along with an ebook or some other product that I'm making. So I have a very clear idea of saying, all right, I need an image that's going to illustrate atmosphere, or I need an image that's going to illustrate geometry. Now, if photography isn't your main source of income, you have a lot more creative freedom with that. But you may already have an emotional state that's in your mind. And what you can do with your photographs is to find images that kind of mirror exactly how you feel about things. Now, I've done this a lot over the years where, you know, I might jump into a folder, for example, let's say, now I know where a lot of my images are, of course. So it's like I could come into my 2017 folder, come into November, and come to Huangshan. Now, Huangshan is in eastern China, and I know that I've got a lot of images in there that are graphic and atmospheric and have strong contrasts. So if I want to make bold statements, or I can suddenly come in and find an image like this and just say, okay, well, that just visually appeals to me right now. So I came in with one intention, saw an image that's speaking to me, right? So I can come into this photograph now, and this is super dreamy. Now I can come in and maybe change the contrast a little. I am going to drop this into black and white with a blue filter, and the blue filter is going to make everything a little lighter. I will come in with a brief tone curve and just allow some of those shadows to darken a fraction, and pull down there, and then bring across that white point, and that's going to create some very nice atmosphere. And I'm going to quickly bring in from the bottom here a gradient, and I'm going to apply dehaze, which is going to make that whole foreground really dreamy, but I'm going to use a luminosity mask to take it away from the shadows. So the shadows will retain some of their darkness, but the fog is getting more diffused. Going back to my distractions video the other day, yeah, there we go. We need to hit the spots. Just so people know that the reason a lot of my sensors have got like this is obviously back in these days I was shooting an awful lot in the Gobi Desert. I was also shooting a lot in the Tibetan Plateau, in the Himalaya, and these are just incredibly dusty environments. So we end up in a situation where, you know, if you change your lens at all, you are going to get some spots on there. Now, I can't stress enough the importance of taking your time over this and making sure that you get rid of every single one of these. If you're ever going to print your photographs, you just want to make sure you don't print out something and end up with one spot that you've missed. So I'm not going to carry on doing this because it must be the world's most boring video. But at the end of the day, I've produced a black and white photograph that is filled with very gentle mood. And the next thing that's happened with this is I'm starting to visualize this on maybe a textured Hamamoula fine art paper. So you can start thinking, right, well, what's that going to look like as a kind of graphite sketch almost on a textured paper. You know, I was speaking yesterday with Julia Anna Gaspadarou, a Greek fine art photographer, and she will be on the Vision and Light series sometime in July. And we were talking about this very thing, the creative process. What is it in us that forces us forward? And we were talking about this elevated state. And what I would strongly recommend is that forget the technicals, forget the goals, forget the competitive nature of photography. If you can immerse yourself in the landscape with your camera and then immerse yourself in front of the computer, these moments of engagement, you know, if I wasn't talking to you guys, I could just immerse myself in the creation of something that might not mean anything to anybody else, but it's everything to me. Living is a gift for us. Photography is a means for us to elevate above the drudge of normality, where we get stressed out and we get concerned with all the crap that's going on in the world. This is an opportunity for us to lose ourselves in luminosity and contrast and atmosphere and graphical elements within frames, and understanding the emotional consequences of all of these elements. I feel this week I've kind of rambled on a little bit, but hopefully you're going to be able to distill the key points out of this, which is, when it comes time to decide what images to process, it shouldn't be an agonizing decision. If you feel yourself agonizing over it, you need to find a different relationship with your work, because we need to get rid of self-doubt. We need to get rid of fear. We need to get that self-critical voice out of our head. It's so important for us to relax and enjoy this for the gift that it is. A lot of the feedback I've been getting from people about the books and now the videos is that it's a liberation and people are feeling creative, and that's such a massive compliment. So I'd like to thank you all for that. On Wednesday, I will be speaking with William Neal on Vision and Light. Now, I've been a massive fan of Bill, as he likes to be called, for years and years now. He worked with Ansel Adams in the gallery in Yosemite in the early 80s, and it's just amazing to be able to sit down and speak with someone who's so connected to that legacy. And his own work is quiet, reflective, thoughtful, intimate, passionate. And the conversation we had was just so illuminating. So please tune in on Wednesday for Vision and Light, where I'll be talking to William Neal. One final thing before we go. I'd like to start sending me in some questions, maybe in the comments below here. Start asking questions, because I would like to do a live, sort of YouTube live type event, maybe in sometime next week, near the end of the week, sort of Friday or Saturday, or maybe even the Sunday, where we can maybe get together live. I'll answer some questions and we can take some live questions as well. That's something I've been really keen to do. So please, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you can click on the link below and maybe investigate the new videos. And there's some discounts available on there now as well if you're buying more than one product. Thanks for watching. Be safe, look after yourselves and your loved ones, and I look forward to seeing you later in the week. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Cheers now. Bye.